Hello, this is Arielle coming back to talk about something different. We've previously discussed what endometriosis is and how it can impact relationships and different stages in your life. And today I want to talk about it from a different perspective, looking at it as a disability. And I know everyone's like, it's not a disability, it's a disease, or it's not a disability, like you're not blind, you're not deaf, you're not on crutches and a walker, a wheelchair, all the stereotypes that come along. Today I hosted a panel discussion on my campus about disabilities during the college years and really speaking on the different types. And so I had a representative of the visually impaired community. I myself was on the panel, someone with a learning disability and someone with a psych disability as well. And so the conversation was very, very much needed, and all those who attended really seemed to have had really good feedback and seemed to learn something. Looking at from my perspective of how endometriosis is considered a disability. And so we define disability as any disease, disorder, condition that truly impacts, negatively for the most part, your daily activity, something you do often. So for women with endometriosis, we know that it often keeps you from going to work or to school because the pain is so intense, or you're getting so sick, especially during their periods. And so we talked about that, but looking at it from a student's perspective, and how do you communicate that to your professors, and missing schoolwork and having so many surgeries in a year, and all of which come into endometriosis as a disability, and also discussing negotiating relationships during the college years while having a disability. And so someone raised the question of intimate relationships, which I've previously talked on in another post of endometriosis and sexuality, and how that impacted me. For other people on the panel, it impacted them differently. And so I really realized that I've become an advocate not just for women with endometriosis. I've become an advocate also for women's health issues, women's health conditions and diseases and concerns and disparities, but also for people living with disabilities, because I truly believe it's an under-recognized population that makes up a very large amount of our population. And so I did recognize while I was on the panel that the five of us weren't the only people with disabilities, but that other people in that room may have very well had a disability as well. They're just not speaking as openly as we were. Someone who was present who has a disability said to me, I'm looking up at your panel, and before you guys spoke, I was like, well, what do they have? Or do they really have a disability, or are they from some department talking about services they can offer? Because if you looked at our panel, for the most part, more than half of us were young women, well-dressed, smiling, makeup on, which is great, but you have to hear people's stories to really understand. And so I was really glad that they were there and they heard our stories, and just really looking at how disabilities can be hidden and invisible, and everything's not as obvious as we want. And so when you're speaking and communicating with women who have chronic pelvic pain, or any type of chronic illness or disease, or even a psych disorder or a learning disability, really consider before you jump to conclusions that they must be okay. My least favorite sentence is, but you don't look sick. Okay. What does sick look like? And just because I had the strength this morning to put makeup on doesn't mean I don't look sick, because I could be dressed and makeup on, pearls on, and every time I see you, I'm smiling. But every time I leave you, I'm in the bathroom hysterical. So you really don't know where the person's coming from. So I guess this video doesn't have necessarily the same intentions of sharing a story as much as it has the intentions of kind of bringing awareness and light to a different lens, a different way to look at endometriosis, chronic pain, chronic illnesses, diseases. Just really consider, what does disability look like? It looks like nothing. There's no one face. And I think the director of disability services said it well today. No two disabilities will be alike. And one woman with endometriosis case is not the same as another woman's, is not the same as someone who's bipolar, who's not the same as someone else who's bipolar. And so looking at the variety and really looking at the individual is important. And so I think my charge to you is to get to know somebody who has a disability, and they may not be as open to talking about it, and that's okay, but get to learn them as a person. And we also talked about, you don't want to be known as the disabled person. No, you're the person with a disability. And so realizing that at first they are human, first they are a person, they are a being, they are a soul, then they may have a condition. It's just a piece of them. And so my favorite endo poster that I saw recently is, I have endometriosis. Endometriosis does not have me. And I think it's really important about how you let disease captivate you at times, and how we get so sucked in to the pain and the turmoil and how it's affecting our life. But really, it's really okay. It's really okay for that to just be a part of you and not all of you. And it takes a lot, because I do remember a time where I felt like endometriosis was all I was. And then that quickly faded, because there's so much more to me, and I love that. I love this learning aspect of growing. I was at a conference this weekend, endometriosis and adolescence, and another woman was there. She's in med school, and she spoke on how as you get older in endometriosis, so as years go on, you learn to cope differently. Your coping mechanisms are differently. The way you explain the disease is different. The way you take care of yourself is different, because now you know what hurts. Now you know what's working. I know this isn't necessarily related to disability, but it does have a lot to do with coping. And I say that to say how I'm handling endometriosis now is definitely not how I was handling it 2 years ago, and definitely not how I was handling it at 16. So this is just, it proves so much to how we grow within our disease. And no matter how much it hurts, it can still, I very well think that my pain now is worse than it was when I was 16 years old. But I've adjusted. I don't cry as much. And I think maybe I'm a little numb, but at the same time, I think I've just learned to cope, and I've learned what works for me and what doesn't work for me. And I think that's really important to people who are living with disabilities. And I think people who've had disabilities for years, we've learned that. And so I really encourage you, and you don't have to have a disability to adhere to what I'm saying, just about coping. And as years go on, and it may not take years for you, it may take days, weeks, months, but just adjusting how you cope and realizing that everything doesn't have to consume you. And I think it's all a growing process, and I think it's really beautiful when you get to the point where you're like, oh yeah, an endometriosis? And I mean, you felt it all day, but at the end of the day, you're like, I didn't even cry today, or I didn't even complain today. And it's a liberating feeling in knowing that you did something positive. And so today we also talked about advocating for yourself and advocating for people within your community of your disability. And so I, in my opinion, believe that I could always do more, but I do advocate for myself. I do advocate for women with endometriosis, advocate for women in general, and advocating for people with disabilities. But I really urge you, whatever community you're a part of, be proud to be a part of that community, and don't mind being a voice. People appreciate having a voice, and so be the voice for those people. And really, it's okay to speak out. It's okay to speak up. Just because they're a doctor doesn't mean they know more than you about your body. So knowing yourself and knowing your body and speaking up about it, I think is really important. I've definitely been talking for too long, so I'm going to stop. But thank you so much for watching. I know it's a little all over the place, but really about disabilities, advocating for self, coping mechanisms, not necessarily mechanisms, we didn't talk about that, but just coping over the years, and that disabilities can be hidden and invisible. And so it's going to be a change. So just open your mind up to new things and be willing to learn something about someone. Thank you so very much. I truly appreciate you watching yet again. Have a good evening.